This is our 13th session for Gateway. And on behalf of Asian Leader Alliance, Asian Business League, and National Association of Asian American Professionals, we welcome you to another free professional development webinar series. And for those of you who haven't joined us, or this is the first time joining us, we offer we have started this series last year just to help equip and empower individuals in the API community to help develop their professional development skills, their soft skills. And now this particular topic, this emotional intelligence, a really important topic that you would use to navigate in your workplace, how you would learn how to control your emotions. When would you, if you have a blowout on and you just explode, for instance, you learn how to control your emotion, when to use it correctly. When can you how you recognize social cues so that you wouldn't recognize your coworkers, your family member, or your friends, so that they would be you can recognize those cues to use that to help identify how they're feeling, and when can you actually toot your own horn appropriately. So with that being said, I want to introduce an expert. I'm not an expert on emotional intelligence, and we're pleased to announce that Kimiko Sakuma will be speaking for us today. So I just want to give her a little background of Kimiko. So Kimiko Sakuma is a founder of Trading Route 3 consultancy that design on-site and online learning engagement strategies and curriculum models for companies such as Office Depot, Airbnb, Pacific Gas and Electric, How Women Lead, and Amgen, among others, which directly enhances knowledge retention, efficiency, process, employee productivity. Kimiko has almost 2 decades worth of industry experience applying her industrial design skills to corporate, private, startup, and nonprofit sectors. Her range of expertise spans from designing the learning experience for conferences across the nation for minority women professionals, or MVP conference series, which help to advance the professional success and equity of minority women professionals to facilitating emotional intelligence workshops for executive, undergraduate, and graduate student programs at the University of San Francisco, such as the Masters of Global Entrepreneurship Management program, China Business Studies Initiative, and Master of Science in Entrepreneurship and Innovation. Kimiko is passionate about working with organizations and programs that promote diversity and inclusion. This desire has led her to working on passion projects such as documentary films, Major Ed Week, which chronicles, documents, and preserves the memory of the first Chinese American mayor of San Francisco, supporting ERGs such as Asians at Airbnb to empower Asian and Pacific Islander community with the resources to enable success. And without further ado, I want to pass on the mic and the presentation to Kimiko. Thank you again for joining us today.
Great. Thank you, Ramon, for the great introduction. And thanks again, ALA, and partnering organizations to help support this professional development series. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you guys can see the presentation today. Okay, let's see. Here we go. All right. Perfect. Can everyone see the screen? Yeah?
Sure can. Thank you.
Perfect. So as Ramon mentioned, I'm super passionate about creating customized and interactive learning experiences. As an instructional designer, I realized there wasn't a one-size-fits-all model for learning, but there are key components and tools that make learning more effective. Emotional intelligence is one tool that I integrate into curriculum to make it more engaging and applicable. So today, we're going to take a dive into emotional intelligence and provide a basic understanding of how you can apply it to your career, leadership skills, and life. So this is an abbreviated version. It's normally about 2 hours where we go into role play, exercises, and assessments. But today we're just gonna kind of skim the surface. And by the end of this webinar, you'll be able to understand and define emotional intelligence, analyze and reflect how emotional intelligence impacts your work, career, and life, and apply and practice various emotional intelligence skills, traits, and attributes. So for maximum workshop interactivity today, we would love full participation and engagement. So we have a couple of ways to do that. One is through the chat box, which Ramon and some other people are going to be, helping to facilitate, as well as moments where you can chime in and introduce yourself and share some of your experiences. So please do that, because the more that you can share and the more that we can kind of discuss things, the more that you can kind of get out of this experience. So we're going to go ahead and kick it off. What is emotional intelligence? This is kind of a buzzword and people, are saying it and you hear it in different articles, but I want you to tell me what you think emotional intelligence is. What are some words, images, thoughts that come into your mind? So if you can go ahead and type that into the chat box, and I'd love to hear, Ramon, like what people are sort of thinking just off the top of your head, what comes to mind? Are there any thoughts that
Sure.
people are sharing with us?
Responding versus reacting.
Responding versus
Knowing how to speak, empathy,
empathy.
awareness, situation awareness, yep, being thoughtful.
Great,
Thanks for the interaction.
great. Those are
Mindful,
wonderful. Mm-hmm.
perceive,
Yeah.
processing,
Mm-hmm. Great. So
self-awareness, and assess.
great. So the definition of emotional intelligence, or EQ. So Daniel Goldman, a leader in emotional intelligence, defines emotional intelligence, or emotional quotient, EQ, as the capacity for recognizing our own feelings, right, and those of others, for motivating ourselves and managing emotions well in ourselves and in our relationship. So that touches on a lot of things that people mentioned, empathy, right? Being able to gauge emotions, right? So you guys are definitely on the right track for understanding what emotional intelligence is. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But emotional intelligence, right? There's a correlation over the last decade that there's an important factor in regards to leadership, right? Numerous studies have shown that there's a relationship between emotionally intelligent leadership, employee satisfaction, retention, and performance. So a great leader understands how their emotions affect others and to use that knowledge to create positive outcomes. So true leadership, in my opinion, it's not about recognition or rewards. It's about how you can give and help other people, which means being open to help someone. And in order to truly help someone, you have to genuinely care, know that person, and be open to that person. So in regards to being a leader, many people have told me, okay, I'll be a leader when I'm a director or an executive, or when I get a specific title. But I want you to think about how you could actually lead right now, right? If you have the ability to influence another human being, you have the ability to lead. So the key is, however, being able to manage emotions and thoughts. I like to think of it this way. For every interaction, you're either moving one step forward or moving one step back, right? This is especially true in work environments where there are multiple communication channels or streams and teams, right? So let's take a quick look at work culture and team dynamics. So in the past, internal culture has been very siloed, right? Primarily in-house. But currently, the internal work culture is very different, right? New hires have to ramp up really fast. You have to be agile, cross-functional, right? There's collaboration, there's this team environment. There's even international and virtual teams. There's the whole gig economy where there are consultants and contractors being brought in to work on specific projects, right? So the use of technology has even amplified communication and interactions. So emotional intelligence is even more important. What you say or do can have a ripple effect across your team or project. So, one of the biggest problems that I hear my clients face are, how do I develop talent for leadership roles? What do I get my team? How do I get my team to take ownership of development? How do I get employees to stay and invest in the company? And there's some personality traits that they tell me over and over again that they're looking for that are highly valued and sought after within organizations, all of which are rooted in emotional intelligence. So these personality traits and characteristics are things like critical thinking, right? The ability to analyze and evaluate an issue to form a judgment or solution. Active listening, right? The ability to listen, identify problem areas, and propose solutions. To be able to communicate, to be concise and articulate. Resiliency, right? The ability to recover, adjust, and take action. And I think this one's especially important right now with, the current pandemic. Things are changing all the time, and we have to be able to pivot within organizations. A can-do approach, right? Being self-disciplined, being motivated, being a leader. Innovation, right? Challenging assumptions, creating ideas and approaches. And finally, courage, the courage to take smart and calculated risks. So these are things that clients are always mentioning that they're looking for in employees. And here are some actual examples from some job descriptions. This one's from Google. As you can see, I've highlighted some of the key words that we just talked about, like collaboration, excellent judgment, giving advice that shows you understand the team. Here's another one from Amazon, right? As you can see here, they have innovative, customer focused, collaborative, right? Working together, being an advocate. And to add another layer to this complex work culture and structure came the COVID-19 pandemic, right? When the COVID-19 pandemic hit, all of a sudden, the world and how we work changed. People began working remotely due to quarantine, right? So as you can see here with this chart, you can see people working before the COVID pandemic and after. And after, definitely more people began working from home. And research has shown that this trend is going to continue, right? It's estimated that about 25 to 30% of the workforce will be working from home multiple days of the week by 2021, and maybe even beyond that, depending on how things progress, right? And so this work style has definitely, been a transition for many people, right? Going from being in the office primarily or working from home a couple days to working from home all the time. And some of the challenges, that people have been mentioning are, staying motivated, right? Distractions from home. But the top three were unplugging after work, loneliness, collaboration, and communication. So unplugging after work, right? And getting burned out. When you're working from home and boundaries from when work starts and ends, it becomes difficult, right? Because, some colleagues have told me that they're actually working more hours than before, right? People are now scheduling meetings during what used to be like commute time is now like a meeting time, right? And so it seems like people are working a lot more. There's a blending of personal space and workspace. What used to be your living room or bedroom is now your office, or you're taking calls in the kitchen. And so being able to figure out, okay, this is my space to decompress has been lost, right? So that's often leading to people get burned out, feeling lonely, right? That's the second struggle, right? The lack of day-to-day office interactions, right? You're not able to go out and have coffee with a coworker daily or go out to lunch necessarily and have a boba. It's like you're at home, right? You're a little more isolated. And the third struggle that a lot of people have been mentioning is communication issues, right? With working remotely. There's a lot of miscommunications that are happening, misinterpretations, especially if, you're doing a lot through email primarily or Slack, or, you're just not able to fully talk things through. Misinterpretations can happen, right? And then there's also this mentality of out of sight, out of mind, right? If you used to, bump into John every day, and, now you don't see him, and the issues that you're going to talk to him about are sort of brushed under the rug, those things can pile up, and it can lead towards dysfunctional teams and things like that, right? So these are common struggles that are happening. But on the bright side, emotional intelligence can help with these struggles, since it helps you to manage thoughts and emotions. And it looks like a majority of us may be working from home a little bit longer. So understanding how emotional intelligence can help create a better work-life balance is key. So I'm going to take a minute here to kind of break into a little EQ trivia. Okay, and so what we're going to do is kind of go through these three questions. And what I'd love you to do is to type your answers in the chat box for each of the questions once we go through them, and resist the urge to Google the answers. I know we're right in front of our computers and we want to Google and see what these answers are, but try to resist the urge. Okay, I want you to just kind of write down in the chat box your first intuition on what you think these answers are. So for the first one, okay, number one, people with high emotional intelligence make how much more annually than their low EQ counterparts? Okay, can everyone go ahead and type in their answers in the chat box? And Ramon, can you go ahead and let us know once those answers start coming in, what people are thinking? How much more annually are people making?
See 50K, 10K,
Okay.
25K, 20K,
Okay.
a lot of Ks.
A lot of Ks. All right.
That's a good 75K. Wow. Okay.
I like
Yes, I
those
like that.
numbers.
Mine's making 150 too.
Nice. Okay. So let's
10K.
see. Let's go ahead and show people what the answer is. So it's about 29,000 more than their annual counterparts. Okay. So for number two, what percentage of top performers have high emotional intelligence, or EQ? So can we go ahead and type that into the chat box, please?
10%.
Okay.
80,
80. Okay.
75,
75.
18,
Okay.
15, 25, 50, 50.
Interesting. We have a lot around the map. We went to 10% all the way up to 75. I like the kind of the
Like
range.
we're reading the lottery number.
Yeah.
75%, 60%.
Okay. So should we go ahead and reveal the answer?
Not, let's do it.
Okay. So it's 90%. So it's pretty high. We got some close answers there. So 90% of top performers have high emotional intelligence. Okay, so number three, the final question here. Emotional intelligence is responsible for what percentage of your job performance? Okay, let's go ahead and type that into the chat box.
65%.
Okay.
You have 45, 75, 80, 75, and back to 80 again, 70.
Nice.
And 75%,
Okay.
40%.
Okay. Should we go ahead and reveal the answer?
Yes.
Okay. The answer is 58%. So emotional intelligence is responsible for 58% of your job performance. So thank you everyone for sort of chiming in and putting in your thoughts into this little trivia here. So as you can see, emotional intelligence plays a key role, right, within your career. Not only are you making more annually, but your job performance, it's almost over half, right? So this is something that's really important. Um, so what I wanted to do is to kind of give you some background information and context on emotional intelligence. Okay, so in 1995, Daniel Goleman defined emotional intelligence, connecting it to traditional intelligence or IQ, but focused on the human connection. Goleman expanded on the work of Harvard professor Howard Gardner. So in 1983, Howard Gardner created the theory of multiple intelligences. He realized that people could have intelligences in multiple ways, and he identified 9 types. And I'm going to go through those very briefly. But number 1, visual spatial. So that's being like picture smart. So that's being able to recognize patterns of wide space. So think of pilots or surgeons or architects. Okay, number 2, verbal linguistics. That's being word smart, right? That's spoken, written language, the ability to learn a language. So think like William Shakespeare or Oprah Winfrey. Okay. Number 3, mathematical, logical. That's number and reasoning smart, right? That's the capacity to analyze problems logically, carry out mathematical observations, or investigate issues scientifically. So think like Albert Einstein, for instance. And then there's body kinesthetic, right? So that's being body smart, using one's body or parts of the body to solve a problem. So think Michael Jordan or Steph Curry, right? Doing those 3-point shots, right? So they feel it in their body. Number 5, musical rhythmic. That's being music smart. So that's someone who has an appreciation for musical patterns, composition, performance. So think Mozart or Beethoven, right? They're really connected to music and being able to communicate in that way. Number 6, interpersonal. That's people smart, right? Understanding the intentions, motivation, desires of others. Think, Mahatma Gandhi or Mother Teresa, really understanding people and how they work together. Intrapersonal, right? That's having the self smart, understanding your desires, fears. And then finally, here, the last 2, naturalist, which is nature smart. So that's recognizing like in classification of numerous species of flora or fauna or animals. Think Charles Darwin or Jane Goodall. And finally, existentialist, right? That's spiritual or moral smarts, which is like a daily occurrence of people thinking about how to tackle problems about why we're here, right? Those are deep questions. So Howard Gardner came up with these multiple intelligences. And, as we continue on, we realize that traditional education focused on, developing a lot of the linguistic and logical mathematical sorts of knowing. And we're moving a little bit away from that and looking more at the 9 types. But Goleman focused more on the intrapersonal and interpersonal. So emotional intelligence is made up of 2 primary competencies and 4 core skills. The 2 primary competencies are the personal competence, the ability to manage your emotions, behavior, and tendencies, and social competence, understanding other people's moods, behaviors. And then it's broken down into 4 core skills, right? What I see and observe, and what I do and how I act. So that's self-awareness, right? Your ability to accurately perceive your emotions as they're happening, and then managing those emotions and directing that behavior. And there's the social component, right? That's social awareness, your ability to pick up on other people's emotions, and then manage that interaction successfully. So in terms of leadership, the key is acknowledging other people's emotions, right? You don't necessarily need to agree, but you need to let them know they've been seen, felt, and heard. It's when we become uncomfortable with other people's emotion, when we often try to shut it down, is when things start to become a little bit challenging, right? Until we can deal with our own insecurities, can we really help other people? So, for example, I remember talking to a coworker, and all of a sudden they just started crying, and I was just totally caught off guard. And I kept telling them, it's going to be okay, you're going to be fine. But really, honestly, I just wanted them to stop crying. I was more caught up on what other people were thinking around me. I was like, are people thinking I made this person cry? Are they thinking we have drama going on? And so I really wasn't listening to that person or being present to their emotional state or even trying to help them. I was just getting caught up in myself, and my own emotions were kind of being taken over in this situation. So I found that really understanding your brain and your emotional response is really, really helpful. So, understanding your brain and emotional response in terms of emotional intelligence, think of emotions as just a chemical reaction, right? It's not necessarily a conscious decision, it's different parts of your brain firing off, right? When you have an emotional reaction, basically the first thing that happens is the amygdala part of the brain starts firing. It's the instinctual fight or flight. It's protecting ourselves from verbal or physical fear, right? Within 90 seconds or so, that chemical reaction is over, and your limbic part of the brain starts to kick in, right? The emotions will start to dissipate if you acknowledge it and allow it to sort of flow through you. Then, but basically, the neocortex is the rational, logical part of the brain, right? And it's there to help you think a little bit more rationally. You're able to identify your emotional state, and emotions are a great indicator of what you're feeling. But like I mentioned, it shouldn't be the drivers of your action, because you want to be able to identify the emotion when it comes up in order to better understand the reasonings why, right? It provides almost like a data point for future interactions. Research says that once you verbalize your emotion, it gives you the ability to process it. So if you have an emotion, identify the word to describe your emotion. Then I would say even go 2 levels down and say, okay, well, why am I angry? Or am I feeling hurt? Does this give me anxiety? Right? So emotional intelligence is basically the awareness and balance of all 3 areas of the brain. So I believe as a leader, you have to model and show others that it's okay to have emotions, but don't let it drive you, right? You have to first understand what's causing those emotions to exist. So, what we're going to do now is do a quick exercise. So, I want you to consider a time when your negative emotions, anger, jealousy, or frustration may have impacted your boss, client, coworker, or friend. So, I want you to close your eyes for a minute and just think back to a specific example of when this happened. And I want you to think about, how did you communicate those emotions? How were your emotions received by others? And what was the end result? So let's take a moment to just close our eyes and think about a time when this has happened. I want to take a moment for you to think about that and really just think back to that and try to relive it as best as you can. Okay, so let's take a moment to do that. Okay, so is there a volunteer, a brave volunteer that's willing to share their example? So all you have to do is, let us know, and you can chime in and sort of introduce yourself. But it would be really helpful, I think, for the group um, to have someone talk about this, and then I'll sort of lead you through the next part of the process. Is there anyone that's willing to do that for us today? Come on. And it's okay if you don't.
I can chime in. It's not
Okay.
the most, I mean, it's a little embarrassing, but
Well, it's okay. We're all family here. It's fine. We would
and I'm
love.
sorry, I'm cooking dinner right now.
Okay.
Um, so yeah, I had a situation where a coworker and I both applied for the next position up.
Okay.
Um, it was a sales position, but instead of managing a team, which neither of us were interested in, it was a higher position in sales.
Mhm.
So more money, bigger contracts. And they had just opened it up, but they were only going to hire one person. And so the other coworker, we were really good friends, but he had, I think, maybe 6 months more experience than me.
Okay.
And we had always gotten along, but we were both on rival teams as far as our hitting our quotas. And so he ended up getting the position over me. So that was very difficult for me to handle afterwards, especially because I felt I was female and he was male. There were just a lot of emotions that came up trying to understand why the management team made that decision at that time. And then also questioning whether I wanted to stay in that position, because I definitely felt I had grown out of it, which is why I had applied for that higher position in the first place. So I think I had a very tough time hiding all of these emotional roller coaster that I was on, all the emotions that were coming up. I had never really had to deal with that before in my career. And it was, definitely very, it's very personal as well. I felt that up until that point in my career, I was very good at separating the personal, or, even showing emotions. I sometimes feel as a minority or a woman, just you kind of have to be even more careful about what you're showing and have to have this mask on at work. And I did that very well, but I think that was one time where I didn't do it so well. And I've learned and grown from it, but I definitely felt others could see my emotions, and it had a negative impact, because I felt like my coworkers and the management team may have felt I was being a sore loser, when I was just really experiencing all the emotions that went along with that experience.
Great. Thanks for sharing. And so, can I ask you a quick question? So, how do you feel? Because I know that you mentioned that you felt a lot of emotions, right? So, how do you feel that you communicated those emotions um, to, like you said, to your friend, or just to the management team? Was
Mhm. I do feel that I was a gracious, you know, uh, uh, like I graciously seceded that he had more tenure, by 6 months. But I did feel that, um, I think I did feel and did show on my face that I didn't see why I didn't get it and he did. Um, Besides that, and this was about 10 years ago. So I did feel that sales was still very much a male dominated place,
Mm,
versus more of a inclusive environment. So, I did use words carefully. I chose my words carefully, and I genuinely was happy for him. I wanted him to succeed as well. It was unfortunate they were only hiring one person for the role, because I think many of us were ready to move on. But in the end, it turned out fine. Many of those people were able to give me recommendations. And, I did decide that if I hadn't gotten that position, or I had, either way, I was ready for more of a challenge in my career, and I did move on. And so I think in the moment, it took me maybe a little bit to be better about how others were perceiving my reaction, but I was also being as authentic as I could. The the emotions were genuine, and I was very happy for him. I just needed to understand what I was going to do next, because staying in the same role wasn't going to be it, you know.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for sharing your
Thank you.
example. And so what I want to do now is go back to the future. And this is one of my favorite movies. And if you haven't seen it, you should totally see it. But in this movie, Back to the Future, there's this cool car called the DeLorean. And it basically, you go in the DeLorean and it takes you back into the future. And you basically can change things, right? That you felt that you learned or that you wanted to change. And so what I want to do now is I want you to, now that we're talking about emotional intelligence, and I kind of gave you some sort of background on what it is, I want you to sort of go back into your mind and think about that scenario. And if you're able to change or redirect your emotions, what would you do differently? Now that you know how emotional intelligence, there are different components, right? There's the way that you perceive emotions and manage it, and there's ways that other people, that you're picking up on other people's emotions and being able to think about how they sort of manage emotions. How would you change how you sort of went through that experience? Is there anything that kind of comes to your mind in terms of your emotional communication?
Definitely, I think looking at it from a longer term perspective would
Mhm,
have been much more helpful. Um, you know, even if we do have differences in how certain people have been treated or reacted to in the past, I think
mhm,
that in the moment,
mhm,
um, you know, I wish that I had been able to look at it from multiple different angles and take in the emotions of others as well. You know, I felt like I had to stand up for myself, and I don't think I needed such a strong response.
mhm.
Um, and you know, they had their reasons for why they chose him over me, and at this point in my life, I do believe everything happens for a reason. And you know, my life trajectory is wonderful. I'm happy where I'm at. I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have been happy taking the role. So I think making peace with you know, the circumstances is a lesson that came out of me, or came out of that for me. And I wish I had been able to practice that a little bit better then, but it was a learning experience. I
No, that's
definitely allowed other people's reaction as well to kind of fuel my negative emotions
mhm,
around the situation. You know, like it was a an example that others used in the company for other things that they wanted to see change.
yeah.
And so it kind of got away from me, you know, a little bit. So I wish I had been more cognizant of how others felt and what the reality of the situation was, not just how I felt.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I really appreciate you kind of going back and sort of acknowledging all those different aspects, because I feel like by just sharing that and talking about that, like in this moment, I feel like you're kind of making that conscious decision, right, for the next time that you'll be able to handle it a little bit differently. Right. And I think that that's the whole that's the great part of emotional intelligence, is I think with practice you can actually improve where you are, right? You can kind of move the needle, because once you decide to change a behavior, if you keep practicing and sort of being mindful of it in different situations, you're able to change that behavior. So I really am proud of you for going through that right now and just really acknowledging those different aspects of that situation and wanting to make a change for the next time. And I think that you will. And you definitely mentioned some great points that we're going to talk about now in terms of, you know, figuring out like what triggers you and what are some ways and tips in the moment to kind of, like you said, calm those emotions down or be able to take a step back. So I really appreciate you kind of helping us segue to the next portion of this. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thanks for letting me share. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
thank you. So basically, And what's great is she talked about some amazing things, and one of them was triggers, right? How do you manage your triggers for better self-control? And I would say it's really to have a plan, right? To anticipate what or who might likely trigger you. So anticipation in my mind is protection, right? Creating a situation that's better for you, understanding yourself, right? For instance, I'll give an example for myself. Like for me, if I'm hungry, I know I get hangry or grumpy, right? So I know, okay, it's better to either schedule a meeting before lunch or after lunch, because if I'm right at that lunch hour, I'm not able to make decisions in the best way, right? So really thinking about yourself, right? What works for you? If it's having someone else like a coworker join the meeting so you feel more supported, do that, right? Have a plan where you feel that your emotional sort of trust and in yourself and in the environment is there, right? Number two, develop a fire drill, right? Manage or regulate your reaction, know your trigger points. And what are some phrases or things that you can say in advance, maybe to get you out of a situation if you're feeling like your emotions are going to take over? For example, say, okay, I need a 5-minute break, or do you mind if I just take a drink of water, right? So that just breaking up that action allows your mind to slow down for a minute, right? It allows that amygdala to kind of calm itself down so you can get up to the higher states of the limbic and the neocortex. And the third one is like a mindfulness practice, right? You want to reduce that fight or flight response and get to a calmer state faster, to be able to observe, right? To step back and see the situation as a whole. So, some good examples of that is just being able to take a breath, right? If you're able to just get up and take a walk for a minute or take a quick break, but just to be able to figure out what that is for you so that when you're in various situations, you can have that plan to kind of get you back on track. I like to think of emotionally intelligent people as being able to like regulate their emotions in order to express themselves more effectively, not necessarily like suppressing their emotions, right? Suppressing your emotions is very different because suppressing is almost ignoring the emotion, right? I don't want you to ignore the emotion. I want you to be able to sit with it and understand and identify what it is so that you can figure out the best behavior or action to take. But sometimes, these triggers can run deep, and I mean deep, right? It's because it's what we were taught to do or how to handle a situation. And sometimes, they're even a part of our cultural upbringing. I found that there aren't too many spaces to discuss this. And so I wanted to take the time today to openly talk about this. Um, you know Emotional intelligence and cultural background is really important, because until we can identify our own insecurities or how we may be perceived by other people, can we change or our behavior or actions, right? So some of the questions that we're going to explore today are, how are you taught to manage and express your emotions? Are there cultural myths, narratives, or stories that support or inhibit the integration of emotional intelligence into your organization or life? As a leader, what are specific areas of emotional intelligence that you could improve and why? And does your company and organizational culture support emotional intelligence at C-suite and executive levels? If so, how? Right. So I'll go ahead and, just kind of kick it off, um, just to give a little bit of personal background on myself and my cultural background. So I'm fourth generation Chinese on my mother's side. Um, we grew up in the Bay Area, but I'm first generation on my father's side. So my dad came to Japan, to the US from a small town. And my dad's cultural influence was very present in my life growing up. It was very strong. And I love my dad dearly, but, some of the cultural nuances were just very deep. While growing up, I would hear things like my father would tell me all the time, like, don't rock the boat, right? In Japanese culture, you want to save face. You don't want to do something that's going to embarrass yourself or the family, right? I was taught to suppress emotions, even if I felt a little bit of discontent. You just kind of push it down and move on, right? I remember this specific example when we went to this restaurant, and the dish I got was just too salty. It just tasted horrible. And I wanted to talk to the manager and basically tell them, it didn't taste good. I want another one. And my dad said, nope, nope, you can't do that. It's too embarrassing. You're going to bring attention to yourself. You're going to insult the chef. So you just have to deal with it, right? And so I found, growing up, that it was hard for me to speak up. It was hard for me to voice my concerns in life, and even at work. And I realized that this was a problem, and I didn't want that to be a barrier for me. And I wanted to be a leader, and I wanted to speak up. And so it's something that I've had to work on, but I had to make a conscious decision and realize that it was something that I was taught, and I could make a difference in how I acted and behaved, right? Another example of a cultural nuance is that I was taught not to talk about my accomplishments or wins, right? Because it's considered bragging or gloating, right? Once again, I realized this was a problem because I wasn't getting the promotions or projects I wanted, because it was standing in my way, this narrative, right? But I realized, when I wasn't getting the projects or the promotions, I was realizing no one's seeing or knowing my accomplishments because I'm not talking about it, right? Another example is the respect for age and status, right? Knowing your place and respecting your elders. This could also be common in a lot of Korean cultures as well. And it's challenging because, for instance, if your boss is older or even younger, right, and having to give that person critical feedback is often sort of a conflict in your mind of what you were taught and what you should do. And this could be a problem, right? It could stand in your way from achieving the things that you want to achieve. And these are just some examples. I realize that being able to identify what these cultural barriers are for me, and how to use emotional intelligence to be more mindful about it, has allowed me to kind of get over that hump, right? And see these cultural nuances as strength and not a weakness. If I'm able to leverage and understand how I'm using that cultural nuance, right? That these, for instance, like the Japanese cultural parts of me can be beautiful if used in the right way or thought of in the right way, right? For instance, like stressing harmony and peace, that can be a good thing, right? If you're able to pick up on other people's emotions, it can be a strength, right? Looking at the collective instead of just the individual, right? Seeing the community as one big group, to be a team player. This is an important part of leadership, right? Another good example that I found interesting was, so as Ramon mentioned, I had the pleasure of working on the documentary on Mayor Ed Lee. And he was the first Chinese American mayor of San Francisco. And we did multiple interviews with various colleagues, council members, political figures. And when we asked them about, what made Ed such a great leader, they all said the same thing. They said, Ed led in his own way. He wasn't loud, he wasn't in your face, but he understood how people acted and what they needed, right? And he wanted to help them authentically, and he got things done, right? So he figured out his own way to lead. He was authentic to himself, And I think that's what made him an excellent leader, right? And so what I want you to do right now is I would love for you to think about some of these questions. And I'd love for you to talk about them and discuss them with us. I want to hear from the group, how were you taught to manage and express your emotions? Are these barriers for you? If not, tell us, what you're doing, some tips or tricks. How is leadership supporting this in your company? And anything else you'd love to share regarding this topic, we'd love to hear about it. We'd love to kind of have a discussion about it. So I'll pretty much just open it up to the floor now and see if anyone would like to share some of their thoughts. Ramon, anyone in the chat box having anything to say, or if anyone would like to chime in, please go ahead and do so.
She said, growing up, I was taught to hide my emotion. One person.
Okay.
Yeah, anyone else that wants to type in the chat box or speak, feel free to do so, to share.
Hi, I'm Kim. I actually have the opposite. I'm fourth generation and I speak my mind, I return food, I do all those things that maybe other people might not do. However, because well, you can't see me because my camera's not working, but because I'm 100% of Asian ethnicity, it's projected onto me. Like I wasn't raised to be docile or what I guess some traditional people might have been.
Right.
However, it's projected onto me. So when I do speak up, say I don't like food or interject at a meeting, it's always like, oh, you're saying something because I'm female and I'm Asian. So I have the opposite, that I behave in a way that might be acceptable if I were Caucasian, but I'm not. So I don't know how to combat that.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Like you're saying, it's almost the flip, right? And I think what's interesting about it is I think that the emotional intelligence part can definitely sort of be important in that, right? Because I think if people are perceiving you in a certain way, right, I feel like you still have the ability to speak your mind and do all those things that may help to change their perceptions, right? Of what, like you said, how they see an Asian American woman, right? Maybe you could help open up their eyes, right, to seeing that there's a different way to see somebody, right? So I think that you're modeling in a way what a lot of people, I would hope, would want to become in some sense. I don't know. Anyone else have thoughts on that? I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on this.
There were a couple in the comments section. Like Belgia has mentioned, she was taught to compartmentalize and wear masks appropriate for each situation, EQ situation. One person says she has similar experience with you as a first-generation immigrant. And then Belgia was also saying that she's Indian, born in India and born in Bay Area and raised in Sacramento. So intersectionality of growing up in different areas.
I can share. This is Eva. So I did say I have similar experience as Kimiko because I came to the United States. I was born in Hong Kong. I came to the United States when I was only 6 months old. So I guess was straddling two different cultures. My parents are very traditional Chinese, but I grew up as an American. And so those were my challenges, because you live in the US and you grow up with all the beliefs as an American, but you have Chinese parents who are very traditional and all the things that you said. You don't want to make waves. You don't want to draw attention to yourself. You don't want to, say anything controversial. You just, you listen to your elders. You don't argue with them. All these things.
Right.
So it was always a struggle, especially when I started working, because I was told I was very quiet. I needed to learn how to be more assertive, but these are things that I was taught not to do. So I had to spend like the early years of my career, like relearning how to behave in a business and professional environment that was different than how I was brought up. So that was my challenge, and it's taken me a long time, but you eventually find the balance, like honoring your culture and your heritage, but also being able to function and succeed in an American business environment. So
right. And so how do you, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate, you being able to be open with sort of the intersectionality of it, right? And the duality. And how do you feel like emotional awareness has sort of helped you move past some of those barriers? Like, do you find yourself in various situations where you have to take a step back and think for a moment and kind of evaluate your emotions before you say something or before you do something? Like, what are some things in terms of emotional intelligence that you may use?
Yes, I would say definitely there are a lot of situations where I put myself on, I guess, both sides of the fence, right? You look at it from one side and then you look at it from the other side. So, maybe I tend to be a little over analytical about it, but I think that's where you learn, where is the balance between the two. And that's part of the whole emotional intelligence, is just being aware of not only your own emotions, but maybe like, the other people, those around you, those others that are affected. So yeah, it definitely comes with practice, I would say. And it's something that you learn over time with experience.
Yeah. No, that's great. And I'm glad that I think what you brought up of being able to identify what those barriers are for yourself, right? Is sort of the first part of the journey, right? Because once, like we said before, once like not your triggers, but things that cause an emotional reaction, right?
Yeah.
You're able to then figure out, okay, well, have that data point. I know that happens when I'm in this situation and I want to speak up, but I don't. So I need to note that, but then have a different reaction or take a different behavior, right? And then, like you're saying, being able to then look at the whole, right? So like you said, how am I being perceived by others, right? Or how are my actions affecting other people? Right. And so you definitely, I think, are on the right track for that, and being able to kind of think in multiple ways, which is great.
Yeah, and it's also helped when I had managers or sometimes even peers who would be in the same room, and they would recognize, that I did have expertise or knowledge, and that I may not necessarily speak up on my own. And they would prompt me, it's like, oh, so what do you think, Eva? And it's just like, oh, okay, then maybe I should speak up. But over time, you learn that I shouldn't be prompted. Like, if I have an opinion or I have something to say, that I should just say it. And that was something that I had to learn and essentially force myself to do. But you come to this I guess realization of when the appropriate times are, and like I said, you learn that with experience.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sorry to interject, but Eva, if you spoke up more, that would be great, because then I would look less out of context.
Okay.
I think one thing, just want to comment on the EQ. I think a lot of times when we talk about EQ, people are talking about not soft, maybe more collaborative, more reconciliatory in terms of communication. One thing I learned working and managing team of a sizable team is sometimes you kind of have to be more assertive. I think being Asian, we're usually more collaborative, more trying to listen more agreeable. But when having a team that you do have to be assertive to say, hey, this is the direction we're going to take. And if you do have a kind of a different opinions, bring facts, bring logic, then have a discussion. That's something I learned over time because initially when I had disagreement with the team, trying to be more collaborative would get nowhere. It took too long to make a decision. Been more kind of, hey, here's the way we're going to go about it until you tell us something different with real data that really put the team back. Okay, I have to take it seriously. Really come back with better information before kind of just voice opinions in the team meeting.
Mhm. And do you have any tips on, because I know you mentioned like managing teams, do you have any tips on what you feel sort of works for helping to manage your teams in terms of emotional intelligence as a leader?
I think definitely listen to the team, maybe in a offline setting, not in the group setting. If there's a disagreement, I usually take it offline and just to say, hey, let's take a pause here. I understand there's differences in terms of opinion, but let's move on with our meeting. Let's have a chat. But when having a chat kind of one-on-one offline, where there's no one around,
Mhm.
extremely frank, right? In the sense of tell me what you don't agree, tell me what's going on. Have a very not a manager to co-employee relationship. It's more like a peer, right? Because at the end of the day, we're just two people working, trying to get something done for a project, for a company. So I think having that approach with the team members offline really helped and really to kind of get them open up as well.
No, that's great. And then do you feel that like for the teams that you work on, if they're different um, cultural backgrounds and different people of different cultures, that you sort of help to support them? Because I remember, the last person that kind of gave some examples, they said that, their team kind of helped to support them. And if they weren't speaking up, their team member would say, oh, well, there's something that you can share here. This is a moment that, we can get your advice. Do you have any sort of tips on what you do or what you find helpful to sort of bring in different cultures or different people on your team to help support them?
Yeah, I would say in my team we have folks who are very, I'll call it sales oriented. You can get them to shut up, and they're engineers who doesn't say anything.
Mhm.
I did learn, depending on the engineer, especially sometimes calling them to say, hey, what do you think? Asking opinions. I follow the typical things. Hey, we want people to speak up. Maybe that'll get them to help. And what I learned is some engineers actually really hate that. They're like, I do not want to share anything in the meeting, right? Like I have good ideas, but I'd rather either tell you one-on-one or I'll go back and think about it, send an email out. So kind of just figure that out, each person's style of communication. And some of them just really hate public speaking or talking in a group, but they're very analytical. They rather make decision offline, take some time to digest and send the email so they don't have to, voice their opinion. So it's just more of learn the different kind of the way they communicate. And a lot of times, yes, it is culturally driven, where they grew up, how they grew up, just kind of picking that up over time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And what I picked up from what you said, which is great, is that it's kind of going back to that multiple intelligence, right? You can, people have different ways of knowing and they're smart in different ways, right? Or they understand information and want to express themselves in different ways. And so I think it's great as a leader and a manager to be able to know, what are the strengths on my team? How are these different people able to communicate? And how can I build trust, right? That they understand or that they believe that I understand how they can best communicate and to support them in that way. So I think that that's a great sort of suggestion and tip that you brought up to the group. because there isn't, right, a one size fits all for everybody, right? Everyone's different in the way that they want to express themselves and their comfort level. So I think, like you said, being able to understand and be aware of various types of expression, right? And thinking about that in all the different aspects. So thanks for sharing that. I appreciate it. Anything else that someone would like to share, Ramon, and anything in the chat box that people are mentioning that you
I'd
want
like
to
to share, if that's
okay.
So obviously we can only talk from our personal experience, and now I have my own business, which has some interesting correlations with emotional intelligence and leadership. I just started a health coaching business, but before that I did software sales for 10 years. And what was really interesting for me was how, especially starting sales in 2004, it's still very much a very male-centric industry, and you kind of had to act very powerful and domineering. And even the few women leaders that we had, they didn't really have the best, the traits that you would think normally would be very compassionate. They didn't have the opportunity, I feel, to really use those. They still had to be very domineering. And so that's something I've really struggled with, is how to have empathy and compassion, but still come off as strong and secure in my role, and being able to, ask for more money like it might be easier for a male counterpart to do. And now that I'm actually managing my own team, I've noticed that with, right now I just have women that work under me. I see that they're also struggling with that as well. So before, where I would have been a lot nicer, I am being a little bit more strict as far as, making sure my employees are meeting my expectations. But I'm also trying to be compassionate. I had a woman that decided to take a internship in London, and she was scared to tell me that, she decided to end our relationship and go do that. And I felt, after practicing a little bit more emotional intelligence, it was easier for me to kind of draw that out of her. But I feel we still have that paradigm of how can you practice emotional intelligence, as a leader or as a subordinate, but still maintain a level of, what we're supposed to have in the work world is, being strong and, demanding you get equal fair treatment and equal pay, especially as a woman, because we're in the Western world, in America, we're told that we need to ask for more money and be strong about it and ask for raises, even though in the Asian culture, we're taught to be a lot more submissive and demure and, not rock the boat, like you said, and keep the peace and make sure everyone's happy, be more conscientious, which is a great trait, but it does kind of go against what helps the bottom line, what brings in higher productivity. So personally, I have been, working on that and trying to figure out what is the healthy way to help others kind of come out of that, folks younger than me or with less experience, and also how to maneuver it from a more compassionate space as a leader myself.
Perfect. Thanks for sharing that.
Can I ask, or maybe add a comment to, just from the sharing, just that as emotion EQ, that's absolutely is very important. But I think as a professional, in a professional setting, I'm curious, like just managing team or working with peers, the way I'm thinking is kind of just trying to understand what the other person trying to accomplish, especially in a professional setting. Some people in the team or in the company, they just say, hey, I'm here just do my 9 to 5, and they clock in, clock out. And there are different kind of approach from an emotional standpoint. And there are folks who are very go-getting, say, hey, I want to climb the ladder as high as I can. And there are people who would say, hey, I just want to actually work with everyone. I don't really care about the financial part, I just enjoy working with everyone in the team. I think each person will require a different way to kind of interact from an emotional standpoint. Like one of the employee who actually had the offer from Amazon, and he came to me like I didn't know what he wanted at the beginning, but he actually didn't want to go to Amazon no matter how much money they pay. I like the team, but I kind of want you to confirm that I'm a great engineer because I have this offer, but I'm going to turn it down because I like the team. But you have to confirm that, essentially acknowledge that he's a great engineer in that sense. But that's kind of like the way I see it. Like everyone understand what each person come to work for, right? Some people for money, some people for title, some people for just for the sake of having a tribe they can feel comfortable with.
Yeah. Yeah, and you definitely brought up some good points that I think, what we talked about earlier. It's just really understanding somebody and understanding what motivates them, right? And that they're being felt, seen, and heard, right? Because I think if they're able to feel those three things, and you're able to know what those three things are for, the people that you're working with, I think it helps to be able to communicate and motivate team members, right? Because you understand what's sort of in the background running, right, to get them to work more efficiently with you. Perfect. Ramon, anything else? This is really great. I'm really glad that we're able to kind of have this discussion, and we're able to talk about this as a group, because like I said, I feel like there are not that many opportunities to talk about this. So I appreciate everyone who's been open to sharing and talking about their experiences and providing advice and tips, because I think as a community, I think this is where we can learn and grow together, right? This is how we can take things to the next level in terms of, like you're saying, modeling the behavior or supporting each other in ways, in meetings and things like that. So this has been great. Ramon,
thanks.
anything else?
Kimiko. So far we don't have any other people right in the comment section.
Perfect. So I'm gonna,
go on. Sorry.
Okay, no. So I'm just going to go ahead, and actually there's one last piece that I wanted to talk about, because I know that we are running a little bit over time. And once again, thanks everyone for sharing and for kind of, exploring the cultural nuances to emotional intelligence, because, this is something that I feel is really important. It's another layer, right, to what we talked about earlier, with the different competencies and just understanding what emotional intelligence is. This is just another layer to add to the consciousness of when you're in various situations, right? To be able to take things to the next level, and to be able to get towards where you want to go. And so what I wanted to do was leave you with this last slide here. Keys to becoming a better leader, right? And a lot of you have mentioned these things already, but I just wanted to just summarize some things that we talked about, right? So one, being able to observe like how you react to other people. So understanding those judgments and stereotypes that may occur in your mindset or thoughts. Practice, right? Someone mentioned that earlier, practicing identifying your emotions and how to direct your behavior. Self-evaluate, right? Know your strengths and weaknesses. We had another, person who shared earlier about knowing themselves, right? And how they come across or how they're being perceived is important, right? Understanding how you react in stressful situations and have your plan of protection. Taking responsibility for your emotions and actions, successes and failures, right? Examining how your actions will affect others before you take those actions. Empathy, right? So these are some of the things that we talked about today in terms of emotional intelligence. We were only able to skim the surface. There's a lot more to this, and I hope that you were able to learn a little bit more about emotional intelligence, that it helped to bring to light some of the things inside of you that be more conscious of now, that things that may impact your work life or career. As I mentioned, this is an abbreviated version. So it could be up to 2 hours, where we do more role plays, exercises, and assessments. And the assessments are pretty cool because basically you can get a baseline of where you are in emotional intelligence by, doing different questionnaires and things like that. But what's great about emotional intelligence is that you can actually improve it over time and with practice. And so I would love to answer any questions that you have. My email's here, my LinkedIn's here. Definitely, if you have any questions post workshop, please do reach out to me. And thanks again for taking the time out on your Wednesday evening to kind of go through emotional intelligence and exploring how to become a better leader. Ramon, do you have any closing statements or anything you'd like to share with the group?
Before we have closing statements, I think we have another question. Do we have any assessments that you can recommend for us?
Yeah, so there's actually some resources that if you want to go ahead and email me, I can send you some information on things that you can look into. There are a couple of assessments that you can kind of take, and especially so in the workshop that I normally do, we take time to go through an assessment that I have, and you can actually go through a whole bunch of questions, and it basically tells you in different categories of the 4 core competencies where you lie, and then it basically tells you, okay, these are the areas that you can improve on. So there are ways that's more data driven for you to kind of have a baseline approach, to having a plan, because I think having a plan, having a concrete sort of process is really important so that you can gauge your improvement. So definitely reach out to me and I can follow up with you on that.
Thanks again, Kimiko, for the great presentation and having us understand, anticipate and navigating our emotions so that we would specifically pinpoint it, that we wouldn't pinpoint to how we would react and not be reactive to the emotion, but find ways to calm it down a bit before we actually impact our coworkers, friends, or family, and just become a better leader. And it's a very important skill set that I'm learning and everyone else is learning. So we really appreciate your time today for speaking with us today about this important topic. We just wanted to ask if everyone, just if anyone that have any question, Kimiko, please contact her. And I think you also mentioned that any companies that is interested in working with her as well, please also contact her. She's a really great resource, great resource for your company. And with that, I just want to also invite everyone for the next month webinar with Rebecca Okamoto, founder of the Vogue Strategy Group. The topic for next month would be the perfect introduction, how to introduce yourself perfectly in 20 words or less. Kimiko, do you have anything to add?
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Ramon and ALA and the partnering organizations for setting this up for us. And once again, thank you so much, everyone, for participating and for being open and for learning with me today.